It's campaign and conquest. Let's play TTRPGs done right. War games and gaming. We're storming the chains of tonight. We got a new system best you'll ever see. A paracosmic convergence of distance masterpiece. It's got the hit shots and plays every genre so well that you would think it was crafted in the depths of hell. It's campaigns and conquests, the best that there is. War games and gaming, with a system that wins. Whether you're a pro or a fighting kid, we've got something better, it's really the shit. Custom worlds, random tables galore, got all the backgrounds and so much more. It's campaigns and conquests, the only true way. War games and gaming, all night and all day. It's campaigns and conquests, better subscribe to the show. War games and gaming, and now you know. It's campaigns and conquests, and we're feeling alright. War games and gaming, we're storming the churches tonight.
Good evening and welcome to Campaigns and Conquests. I am Storm. I'll be flying solo tonight. Magenta is sick again. She's got some problems. We'll be talking about hex crawls and DMing hex crawls, but just want to give a little bit of a shout out here for this poor gal. She usually helps me. She's fighting some really bad health issues. That's her email. So feel free to give her a little help, a little encouragement, because she's not doing good. So sorry to start out with a bummer, but she needs some help. Anyway, so one of the things that I want to talk about is hex crawls, generators, how to do things better. I was listening to some podcasts. I was trying to think of the right word. It's audio, so it's podcast. Isn't that how it works? Anyway, was listening to them. Some people were talking about how generators don't always put out the right output. Sometimes they get illogical results. They weren't sure how to deal with a hex that has flat planes, and then the next hex gets mountains or such. So just kind of, we'll start with the generators and some of the ways that you can mitigate those kinds of issues. And this goes back to what I was talking about some time ago with internal consistency and a little bit of science, earth science. I know that kind of everybody goes, oh, this guy's going to go all professor on us. But all I'm saying is that if you have terrain that is naturally adjacent or flows into another terrain, then that should be put into the chart. Instead of just randomly dumping a bunch of, well, we've got lakes and marshes and forests and desert and put them all in one chart. Well, just audit the results and look at everything and say, well, some of these don't work with one another. So what I do is I use just a little bit of the old science stuff to kind of have the charts lead into different types of terrain, so they make a little bit more sense. Give you an example. You ever been out hiking? Let me put that email up. I might have taken that down too fast for people. Here's her email. Go ahead and write that down. Send her a get well card. But you ever walked into like a bog area? Typically, you know, you're going to get to a bog before you get to the bog, because you have that smell that comes with it. There's usually indicators. And as a DM, if you use those indicators, you could be properly descriptive and give people a heads up. See, one of the problems the guys was talking about was, how can you not know a hex, a mountain's coming up? If it's in the next hex and you're rolling for it, all of a sudden you kind of have an inconsistency where somebody how come I didn't know this mountain was here? I should be able to see it from a long ways away. Well, set up your generator so they start giving hints. And as a DM, you can also start giving hints by being more descriptive about the terrain and some hints that might lead into there's something coming. I live very near Lake Michigan. And of course, road signs and such and maps, I know where it is. But one effect of the lake in this summer, and late summer and early fall was, I'm getting that right, yeah. It got cold when you got near it. The bigger the lake, the bigger this kind of effect. And with Lake Michigan being one of the larger lakes on the planet, not the largest, I guess, but one of top 3, I think, at least top 5, whatever it is, statistically, it's a big mother. And there was a spot on the road when I headed east in my convertible where, bam, it was like hitting a wall. You got cold right there consistently. Now, if it's a smaller lake, that happens a lot closer to the lake, to the point where it may not make a difference if you're describing it, but you still might be able to hear water. You might start seeing wildlife that leads you to believe you're getting close to somewhere that's got water. This is why I was talking about having wildlife and monsters that, when you start considering where they live, what they might feed off of, what kind of habitat they enjoy. And I got mocked for it by brosters and other people saying, oh, it's silly and overcomplicated in details. But it's not. If you use this sort of thing, you have a particular monster that tends to hang around lakes. Maybe some signs of him or her or it in the area might, hey, a player, I've dealt with those monsters before, and I know they like to live near lakes, or they like to live near cliffs. So I know something like that is in the area if I see one or I see tracks or something thereof. There's also geography hints as well. So if you look at something like first edition D&D and read through the charts and all the asterisks and signs and stuff, you'll see that it was meant to try to lead from one terrain to the other. I do it a little bit more in detail. I have a little bit more to it than that, but there's certain examples of it that show you're about to move into a different direction as far as what kind of terrain you're about to see. Let's pull it up, take a look. I have it on PDF, so if I can get my computer to cooperate with me. I probably should have had this up already. Anybody questions, comments, criticisms? I sure like to have a back and forth. I love to be able to discuss things with the folks listening. So any counter remarks, anything like that, while I load this up. But anyway, I'm just going to show you how this kind of stuff, and this isn't the most detailed. I mean, I can, and I know people hear detail and they think, oh, that's going to be too complex. What I mean is you could take this further so it would be more efficient even than 1E. So I don't have everything committed to memory. It's kind of gone. So I have to I use charts and tables of contents so that I don't have to remember. All right, so here we are. Let's get a look. Anybody got anything to say here? Comments? Oh, hell, there ain't anybody here. Okay. We'll move on. Let's get the screen share. Screen share. There we go. So, let's see if that's showing right. Okay. All right, so let's just take forest land. The chances of getting into scrub from forest are fairly low. All of these ranges are based on the possibility of going one to the other. Here, desert just isn't a thing because you just don't see those two things adjacent. So it does try to keep the illogical out of it. It may be a little bit lax in its attempt, but there is an attempt there. So now one of the things I always get out of people is go, well, fantasy, you don't need anything to make sense in fantasy. I disagree with that. I don't think that helps. Just because you have, purple magic mushrooms that blow dust powder at people to poison them or something like that doesn't mean that you won't have desert hills and mountains and so forth. And even if you've completely eliminated earthly terrain from your world, there still is, is it going to be just completely random? Is it just a Jackson Pollock painting of terrain? Wouldn't that seem questionable too? There has to be some logic to it, or what would be the point? Are we all just going to play in this Alice in Wonderland, trippy? I understand the need to want something new and fresh and have some uniqueness to your world and all that, but I think if you look at any world that's gamed, it has, there's some structure, there's some internal consistency to it. So this kind of thing would still work. But as you look through all the columns and look to the left, and the number ranges in them, you'll see how they're made in such a way that that they try to keep logical groupings of terrain adjacent to one another. So, but yeah, you can be on the plain and come up to a mountain. So that comes up to the here, it's right here. If you're looking, you can see right. It's not got a huge range, but it's got a chance. So what else do we do to deal with that? Like I said, there's means of looking at a lead-in from that. Just because it's plains doesn't mean it's going to not start looking maybe a little rocky. You might see some indication that the mountain's coming. And then that also takes me to sorry, sometimes I do draw a blank. I'm old, but two other things like sight. Having some line of sight, having some range of view is very helpful. A person approximately 6 foot tall can see about 3 miles. That's where the horizon sits, and you can't see past the horizon. So how big is your hex? Is it bigger than 3 miles? Well, why? And at the even if you're not into changing the scale, maybe doing something to consider that you're not going to see out of that hex, even if you're hex crawling and generating a new hex. Maybe they're consider that. You know, talk about what's inside the hex in a couple of different places. Well, when you enter it, you see this. As you start to exit, or as you start to, this is why I always use time as well. How are you going to divide those two things up? I do it by knowing how long it takes to cross that hex. So I can say, well, for about a half an hour, you're looking at this. The terrain is generally this, and you see, this kind of tree or this kind of foliage, whatever it is. The next thing is, what you might see as far as what's inhabiting it, whether it be wildlife or monsters or a little bit of both. But adding a little bit more description to how long you've been in the hex might help. What you see, how far you see, considering line of sight. What if you're in the plains, but it's forested ahead of you? There's a forest hex in between you and the mountain. How tall is the forest? How many hexes does it go? See, one of the things I think that makes another issue is if you don't consider how far somebody can see, and you have a hex that is as big as, or maybe smaller than how far a person could see, maybe you should think about macro generation. And the way to do that is, I used to see these things used a lot more than I see them now. Of course, I don't get around to places like I used to, but there was people that would have like pill boxes that would have dice in individual boxes, and they'd shake the whole thing. And I would do something like that for macro generation. 6 boxes labeled, first, second, third, or A column, B column, or whatever it is, depending on the charts you're using, and shake that way. And you'll instantly get, your hex and a few around it. And depending on how far out you can see. If you're going to use a very large hex, like I'm seeing these people play this, what is it that they're calling it? Goblinstein. And the hex is 100 miles. You might consider nested hexes, subhexes, so that you have some way to track the fact that you're walking. 100 miles is a hell of a long way. Another little mathematical factoid is, if you're marching in a line or in a formation, figure that each person's taking up about a square meter of space, because you're not going to walk and keep stepping on people's heels. You're not going to get all intimate with them. You're just going to, there'll be some space. And then consider that as where you sit inside the hex. Give you some scale of how much area is around you if you're a party of 6 people, or even a platoon of 600 within 100 miles, marching in some sort of formation. Hell, even if you're just walking around in a gaggle, you could still figure 700 yards, 700, 800 yards maximum out of the several thousand that make up that hex. So precision helps with these issues, and it's not ultra detailed precision. It's not calculus class. It's not a science class in college, but just basic stuff. Like how far you can see, What's the atmospheric condition? There's another one. You can walk up to a lot of things if that you don't know are there if the fog is thick enough or it's dark enough. Um, your ability to see details varies in atmospheric condition. Even if you can see farther, or as far, if it's snowing or raining, it's going to be more difficult to make something out, even if you can see it. It actually ends up that most of the time those kinds of conditions will uh, retard your ability. Can I still say that on the internet? You know what I'm talking about. Reduce, if that's more politically correct or accurate grammatically, your ability to see. But uh, just considering more of the environment, more detail of the environment. I'm not talking about, again, when I do this sort of stuff, I usually get people that go, well, this guy, he wants to go crazy and he wants to make it actuaries. What's the one that I love to hear? Accountants and actuaries. No, but I'm not talking about a Robert Jordan description of a forest, but I am talking about, can you see out of it? What's the average height of these trees that you're walking through? What kind of trees are they? Is it fall? Can you see through them? It's one of the things I always noticed as a kid was how much more of the neighborhoods and the details of the people's yards and how much farther back I could see into people's yards in suburbia when it was fall or winter, when all the trees had disappeared and all the things that masked the line of sight. Well, not all the things, but the big trees, the big maples and stuff in my area. All of a sudden you could see a lot farther. Oh, that guy's got a sandbox back there. I didn't know that, and so whatever it is, whatever detail. But it does change how your players perceive things. So it sounds all simulationist and people get all, it's too complicated. It's not really. It's just using a little bit more detail in your mind as a DM to describe what's happening instead of, well, you're in a plains hex and next is a mountain hex. Well, yeah, that sounds illogical if you just are very basic and vague about the description. But how big is the hex? What else is inside that hex? What may have contributed to the players not really noticing the mountain until they get to a certain point, things like that. Hello, Kelly. Yeah. Yep. Flying solo tonight. Robin or Magenta sick again. So trying to do it all by myself. Hopefully I'm doing a good job. Light sources in the evening and in at night. How far can you see man-made objects? Now, a clear, bright, modern city, you can see maybe 30 miles away. If you're talking about fantasy role-playing, yep. It's been a real rough time for her with the health, but as you can see, in a fantasy setting, when the lighting for a city would be predominantly torchlight or candlelight or whatever like that, you could probably just wing it and take half or a third off. So and now you know how far away. And if you know the size of your hex, my players will start to see indications of a village or city about this far away, provided that there's a line of sight. And one of the reasons they want to know that is they want to prepare. Should we go in? Is it a hostile city? Are there reasons to avoid it? Something like that. That was brought up, made me think of this in the first place. The person was saying there might be a way to go around that mountain if I knew it was coming. So by instituting just a little bit of science and a little bit of camping and type of knowledge, things like that. Tracking people, tracking monsters is another thing. This doesn't have to be super complicated, but do DMs? I mean, I don't play a lot, so I don't know how this goes. But I hear a lot of people complaining about this stuff and it not working well. Do you tell people, you know, that you may see tracks or something like that? One of the things that was in the intro was wandering monsters. This is another thing that brought up. A wandering monster or a random encounter doesn't necessarily have to mean combat. If I, people complain about the generators for random tables. Well, sometimes you get something that's so overpowered for my group, it just it, it's no good. And then they say, well, the generator's no good. Well, they can run away, and if you're use a little bit of imagination. How's it doing? Going there, I'm going to try this right. Latveria. Thank you. I think I got it right. Right? How you doing? Feel free to correct me on phonics if I'm incorrect. But anyway, a wandering monster doesn't have to be a combat situation. Good. Thank you. Glad I got it right. Thanks for showing up. The last time I played with my group, a giant came up. They're not ready for a full size giant. So what I did is I used them as a clue. I used them to indicate something else is going on, and I put them in the story a little bit later on. So and again, using how far you can see something away. Dusk is the hardest time to make out details, but you don't need a lot of details when something's 20 feet high coming at you walking. There's a little bit of noise that might be heard. I gave just a vague description. There's something that looks tall, and you hear the footfalls that sound like a human's rhythm, but a little bit louder. And it's a giant, run. And just put the giant far enough away that they had the ability to run or take cover from their position. And they just watched it, took note of its direction, and that was it. Instead of going, oh no, the whole game's ruined because it's going to be a TPK. I rolled gold dragon when these guys are only 3 levels. These generators stink. No, just make it an observation. Hell, the thing doesn't even have to be around. Maybe they just see signs of it. Maybe they see some scales that have shed, indicating that a dragon has been in the area. Something like that. Maybe there's indication that it used its breath weapon on something or somebody else, or just tracks in the mud, broken trees, something like that. That might indicate a lot. You don't even have to tell them what it is. Something big clearly has moved through the area because a lot of the foliage is compressed. A lot of trees are cracked and knocked down by something very big. Stuff like that. So there's plenty of ways to get your players the information. Whereas the person that kind of brought this up to me said, well, you'll get caught flat-footed if the generator isn't made right. Well, I think they are made right. I think that DMs just need to be a little bit more descriptive in some cases about what's going on. So if you're a D&D player and you go to something like let's see. Let me get it up. The Wilderness Survival, you'll see that they did the same thing. Here's Wilderness Survival. Well, not yet. I'll put it up when I get to the right page. There's a handy dandy charts. I love charts. Some people get all upset about charts. I like it because it summarizes information. It's easy to reference, and don't have to commit it to memory. And I don't have to, I mean, if it's arranged right in the manual, I don't have to flip through pages. If it's not arranged right in the manual, you can always use a photocopier. The majority of these games will, they say it's okay. You can print out the tables for your personal use. So, but all these tables in wilderness survival handle a lot of the kind of things that a lot of people say, well, DMG and is okay, but it's lacking in these generators, or sometimes they don't make sense, or they don't do everything I need. If you're going to hex crawl in D&D, AD&D, get yourself the wilderness survival guide, and anything that's missing from the DMG will be here, as far as how far you can see, how far you could move. It's got more detail than most people will probably use. And the way these things are compiled is the same way that I do it when I do make my war games and make my RPG. And that is, I go to something like I have somewhere, I forget the exact field manual nomenclature, not that it really matters, but I have a field manual that gives the approximate distance you can observe a lit cigarette cherry. When people are puffing on it, it's got the little a lit match at night, things like that. The approximate range things can be heard. That's another thing. How many DMs use auditory clues or do so consistently? Or smell? Probably a lot less people use smell than use auditory and visual. But use more smell. If you're getting near an ocean, you can smell it before you can see it in some cases. I remember vacations to Florida as a kid, and there were times on I went to Sanibel Island a lot. I didn't get over the duck as often as other people in my family did, but I did get the duck, and it was, at least at that time back in the early '80s, it was pretty heavily wooded, and there were times where you would be blind to the ocean and the shoreline, but you would know you were getting close to it because you could hear it and you could smell it before you saw it. Like I said earlier, same thing with bogs and lakes and places like that. Farms would be another one. You can smell the waste from the livestock. So you would know you're approaching one or something like that. But here again, there's all sorts of, and you can pick and choose. You don't have to roll on every single one of these all the time or use them, but they're great reference to have handy for hex crawls. And they use the same kind of information. How far you can see in certain atmospheric and lighting conditions. How far can you walk? The average march mode or hike mode distance traveled is 3 to 4 miles an hour. So now you know how far a party can move generally. And you don't need to do math for this. You don't have to get out the quill pen and the notepad anymore. There's places like this. So get that frame up. Something like this is as easy as pie. How fast you're going? Well, we've already figured that out. 3 miles an hour. Okay. We want to solve for distance. What's the time? Well, are you using a time scale? A lot of people aren't, but you should, in my opinion. Of course, you play the way you want to play, but I like to use time for a lot of reasons. This is one of them. Let's say 4 hours. 3. Oh, The output I put in the wrong thing. MI, not M. Try it. Okay, 12 miles. So what's your scale of hex? 3? Okay. So now, if you've got a 4-hour phase for your hex crawl, now you know how many hexes they can move if they're not hindered by inclement weather and or rougher terrain. That's another thing. The U.S. Army, and I'm sure other armies or other militaries have done this too, where they've gone out and done the geological surveys for planning purposes. So they'll give you an approximation of how much loose sand slows down a march, loose gravel, inclinations, muddy conditions. They're approximations, but they're good enough for the game. So now you've got yourself a terrain effects chart where you can use that as a DMG and say, well, it's hard going because there's driving rains and you're on a muddy trail and that adds a little ambiance to everything. It makes the hex crawl a little bit more interesting and more detailed instead of just, well, you've walked a long ways and now you're at your destination and it's just this vague, why are we even out here? We're passing all the detail over. Why not just go from one position? And I'm sure a lot of people do that, and that's fine too. But if you want to move around in the hex, the whole hex crawl. If you listen to Rob Kuntz, who's on Twitter and talks about it, and he's kind of last surviving D&D founder. He says the whole idea was we got tired of being inside dungeons. We had a castle. We wanted to go out and see what it was about. And they used a game called Wilderness Survival. If you saw my promo for this video, it was right there. That game was kind of the basis for their hex crawl and wilderness version of D&D. And the whole premise of that game was exactly what the title game said, survival. And I think there's some real fun, dramatic, and interesting scenarios that can make hex crawls a lot more interesting if you take into effect that being out in the elements can be dangerous in its own right before you even tangle with an orc or a dragon. So, and I think they thought that as well. That's why there's disease in there and all that sort of stuff. Now, some people don't like the disease. They feel it's a cheap way to lose a character, fine, whatever. But considering that you may be slugging it through horrible conditions and how those might affect your ability to perceive the world around you or get to your destination, just might make things a little bit more spicy and interesting. And I've put that in my game, which I think I've done a good job of making things simple, but yet including these kind of elements. Because usually when you talk about combining a lot of this stuff, a lot of people start getting into complexity. But I don't think detail has to equate to complexity or complication or bogging the game down. A lot of people do that. Just considering these things and making the considerations for them extremely simple so that they have their effect without being burdensome. That's what you're really looking, at least that's what I'm looking for. Right. Yeah. And that's another thing. Your mental state. Comanche Sullen. Fear of death can bump that number up exponentially. Yeah. So, and how did Gary put it? I'm not going to get it completely right, but something to the effect that your players should be in fear for their lives, or the character should be in fear for their lives 75% of the time, or something like that. And being out, in the wilderness filled with hostile creatures and a hostile environment where there might be poison vegetation and wandering creatures that'll attack you. It makes it more interesting than just here's a river, here's some woods, let's roll and see if you get jumped by something. Yeah. Right. And greed. And that's another thing that, one guy was talking, that another person that brought this up to me, made me think about it, was how to get around, how to get past a river when there's no bridge, and considering how terrain might affect that. Where a good place to cross is. How far do you have to walk up the bank just to get to there? The decisions that come from a little bit more detail in a hex crawl, as opposed to here's, hex A, now hex B, and it's just this connect the dots trail that, if there's something good on the other side of that river, is it good enough to risk crossing it in a haphazard way or a dangerous way because there's no other way to get around it, or get over it, I should say, or get around it. Same thing with a mountain. No pass. Well, there's no pass, but what we need is on the other side of it. So you're going to climb it. You're going to find a way around, and that's what the Wilderness Survival Guide in DMG does. Now, I don't have all this library of books. I've got everything in a couple of books, but I've put all that in there. All referenced out of, typically, not always, but typically military sources, because a lot of this stuff can be translated into military necessity, and it's free and easy to get a hold of. At least in America, it is, that information. So that's why I use it. But you could use hiking guides, and hell, even I've seen guys get stuff out of the Boy Scouts manual. Thinking about light and heat, survival, and all that sort of stuff. The one thing with the DMG, I think it was in the DMG, that I always kind of didn't like, was on page 85, where they give you that finger waggle about detail and hunting and all that stuff. I'm not saying you should role play, hunting small game, but just saying, hey, I have to go hunt for small game because I've run out of my field rations or my iron rations. What's wrong with that? Did you, all you need is just a simple die roll. The DM can make it up. It doesn't have to be some complicated procedure. Well, the area seems like it's teeming with wildlife. The chances of them, bagging a deer or a grouse, roll your dice. That's my dice sound effect. Go ahead and roll them. How much did you get? Did you get enough to feed the family? Because if you don't buy enough rations and you're out there for a week and run out, you can starve to death, stuff like that. Planning that stuff out, making sure that you survive, I think is interesting. Some people say it's tedious, I guess, but it makes the hex crawl an adventure as opposed to a overly simplified exercise in generating a random map. So that's my best attempt at sound effects. But it's an easy thing to balance it out and add some of the stuff without boat anchoring your game into war game levels of administration and procedure, stuff like that. I was just here, Rob. I mentioned Rob Coons. I just read him saying the same thing. A little bit of imagination with just a pinch of mechanics and rules is really what they were striving for. Excuse me, had a hiccup. Especially Rob. He was really into that sort of stuff. I think Dave seemed more like the war gamer at heart, but it doesn't have to be complicated. But right, Jordan. It can very small things like that can just add some interesting, minor, quick role playing issues, and it makes your party seem just that much more vibrant and alive. It does. Small talk and the small things that happen, as long as they're brief and simple, can be, enhance the experience for the players and the DM. So the little scenario he put out there is exactly what I'm talking about. But it always seems to get perceived as he said math and science, so this must be some book learning. No, just sweetening the pot, putting a little extra into it. Right. I mean, you can. Comanche's has got a great one there. You can throw a little loop into it too. That kind of imagination is exactly what Rob was talking about. But if you don't consider some of the details without massive procedure, just think a little bit more detailed, and it just makes the game seem a little bit more to it. It's like video games. If you go into like an RPG video game or a first person video game, sometimes it's the little things that really make the game. Like, I forget what game title it was, but my avatar walked by a candle that was on the wall, and walking by the candle, it kind of flickered from the breeze of me walking by it. I mean, do you really need that? That's a real minor detail, but it made the whole thing more lifelike. Those little touches can really make, and that's why I like to use a little more detail. Plus, sometimes the math and the science, we're not talking collegiate level, and it solves a problem, and it's an easy tool to get you the answers you need without having to come up with complicated schemes to make something up. Right. Exactly that. If you're going to hex crawl, you're going to need all this random stuff. But I think some people go, well, it's not good enough because it doesn't tell enough story, or it leaves something vague and unable to be interpreted properly. It puts, this terrain type too close to this terrain type. Well, then you need to tweak the generator. But a little bit of an imagination can make the generator come alive instead of just being this kind of simple machine that gives you a very vague output. Yeah. But knowing a little bit of basics, how far do you move? How many hours a day are you walking? That's the other thing. A lot of people go, wow, this seems like we're going real fast. Well, you might have based your movement range out of 24 hours, but people don't walk for 24 hours in a day. They break to, use not that I'm saying you should put this into the system. I'm just saying there are things you'll break for. Using the facilities, stopping for lunch, having to rest, having to sleep. So consider that and think that you'll be maybe going 8 to 10 hours as opposed to 24 hours. And now you'll seem like you're not moving so fast, and it'll be a more realistic rate, things like that. But a little bit of math can get you anything. How far do I want to climb? Like if a player tells you I want to climb up a tree, and how much farther can I see up the tree? I mean, you could spitball it, sure, but what if you're spitballing? What if your guessing is way off? You can quickly do a little bit of simple calculator math to get a good answer. Maybe you're making a map, but you're really not sure about that sort of stuff, and you want to put it in there. I want to make a 30-foot high hill, but I'm not sure how far somebody could see if they're standing on top of it. Real quick and easy to do. Square root of the height, times 0.117. Simple stuff. Yeah, you can make it. What happens if you walk up to the bush and there's a bear on the other side of it while you're having a little bit of a break? What are you going to do now? The player's going to have to think of his way through that, because he might not have his weaponry with him while he's indisposed. So all sorts of little ways of doing that, but I put in my system, I just put in some hints that show people, the kind of thing I'm talking about. Hey, if your people are coming near a lake and These are the kind of things that indicate you're getting close to one. The ground might be a little bit more moist. The air might be. The sounds, the smells that might come with an inland lake, because at least in the Midwest, you can often smell them. Sometimes that's because of man-made, pollution and all that, but they still have a smell no matter how natural they are. So just things like that. Fatigue. I think fatigue is another thing that's great to use. And it doesn't have to you don't have to roll for it. You don't have to give it there's no roll. I mean, you could do save versus fatigue if you just want to be easy about it. But the other thing is how long you been going? Well, we don't want to stop. We want to try to make the next city. So we're going to march longer. Okay. But if you start marching 2 hours past when you normally do, people are going to start yawning. They're going to start getting tired. That may affect your ability to detect things. You're all groggy and not paying enough attention. You might get jumped, something like that. You might not perform as well if you have to fight. Hell, fatigue in a combat thing. And again, it doesn't have to be mathematics. Just something as simple as if your constitution's 15, you're going to start huffing and puffing after this many rounds of combat. That's all. Makes things more interesting. Makes you have to think about what are you going to, some people like to be the, heroic fantasy where none of that stuff happens. They're Conan. You can't put them down or anything like that. Okay, that's a style of play. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit lower fantasy, thinking about the fact that heaving around 7 pounds of steel at something can tucker you out mighty fast, yeah, and it just starts to be a penalty. Just makes things interesting, and makes people play. But you'll have players that'll be a little bit more tactical and a little bit more thinking, as opposed to just Hulk smash in their combat sessions if they've got to get the job done in a set amount of time, things like that. Yeah. Yeah, and certain people are less tolerant of this than others. So, like you say, you got to read the room and all that. But I put it to people this way. Sometimes I think that the problem with, I don't know if you see, some people might even consider it a problem, but I see a lot of fantasy rules. I went to Drive Through RPG, and when I put in fantasy rules as a filter, hundreds come back. Why is this? Why is everybody doing this? It's like people just keep eating, but they're not getting any nutrition, so they just keep reaching for more. They're not getting filled. What's in there that isn't satisfying them or filling them up? And I think in some cases it's the very thing that they say they need to avoid, and that's just a little bit more depth, detail, and scope to the game. And if you just maybe just think, all right, I'll give it a try. I'll add a little bit more into it. You might be more satisfied with the game you play and realize that there is that balance that you can have some interesting stuff in there and not have it turn into something so complicated and no longer is interesting to play. Yeah, right. And that's it. The history of this stuff, really, all of it, tabletop, wargaming, RPG, and all that, I think you can make a lineage trace back to Kriegspiel, circa 1812 or whatever, where Kriegspiel was somewhat procedurally heavy, but then there was what they called free Kriegspiel, Verdi, and it was more about just how these guys are putting it. These rulings, not rules. And I think there should be a lot of that. And again, going to the extremes, a lot of people go, well, you can't play a game that doesn't have rules. I'm not saying you shouldn't have some rules. There's got to be some structure. There's got to be some nuts and bolts to the combat system and stuff like that. But in general, easing off the procedural 20-page manual and just going, here's some guidelines. Here's some ways you can maybe arbitrate this stuff without having paragraphs worth of verbiage. That's what I'm doing. Just basically giving you free Kriegspiel. I've got a lot of different options and a lot of details, but it's not an Avalon Hill rule book, subsection and all that old stuff. It's just real basic guidelines. And yeah, there's tables and there's math in there and stuff. If you want to figure out a percent. Oops, let's get that off. Somebody decided to advertise. But if you want to get, there we go. Want to get precision in how far you can see the hill or something like that. Here's a quick little math formula, or here's the link to the website I just showed you. And there's tons of that kind of stuff. But yeah, just having a DM that can remember to be just slightly more detailed about the environment that you're in, other than the foliage is green and the trail is long and it's a sunny day. Get a little bit more detail in there, and it'll help people plan and stuff like that. But you have to sell it to the players too, because I'm sure you'll get people to go, all right, get on with it. You're talking too much and all that. But if they're upset that they're bored because this thing isn't giving them anything to think about, maybe talk to them and say, hey, if we just put a little bit more into the description and the environment, you might get a little bit more out of it too. That's what I'm doing with it. And it doesn't, hopefully you'll try my game. I'm going to put it out. And I'm ready to demo it to people, but it's a method that can be used in all sorts of different games, frankly. So I'm kind of, and I like the domain play stuff. So I've got all that as well. So I've got the whole kind of thing with wargaming too. With wargaming, you don't need some of that rules. You can come up with something fairly logical when it comes to, hey, we want to cross a river, as long as your map is detailed enough to say, hey, here's a ford, or here's a shallow place, whatever, something like that. You don't need 5 paragraphs on rules on building bridges or something like that. But you still need hard numbers about the combat units and stuff like that. So I've got that. Yeah. And that's and it took me a while to go, I don't know what the people are saying about this, player driven stuff, but I get what the comment is now. I get the phraseology. I understand. Yeah. Yeah. All you want to do as a DM is arbitrate rules that, or situations that need it. And other than that, provide the player with the information they need to make the interesting decisions that they want to make. That's what I heard somebody define a game as years ago, and it was the best definition ever as far as tabletop gaming. It's a series of interesting, if it's a good game, it's a series of interesting decisions. And that's what people are looking for, a series of interesting decisions. Provide them with the information to make those interesting decisions. And they're more than just, what spell am I going to use against the orc this time? It should be, and in order to do that, you need just a little bit more detail. But you don't need more procedure for the detail. That's the secret. And that's what I planned. That's kind of what the point I want to make with what I'm making. If there was a message behind, or a, a mental, this is why I'm putting this rule set out, it's that you can't have your cake and eat it too when it comes to scope and well, realism isn't really the right word, but for lack of a better. Right. Yeah. That's the other thing. It's old school. My stuff is, and the way I play is old school in that you're not going to get 10 chances to get out of it. You're not going to have double saving throw over that. If you screw up, it might be your character's last day. But I find that interesting. It means you have to move with some caution. You really have to think things through. If I want to play first person, I'm just going to lay waste to everybody. I'll go play Battlefront or Duke Nukem or whatever like that, and then I can just just gun people down or whatever. But I want a little bit of tactical thinking and planning in the system when I play. So that's what I'm doing with mine. So, and some of that's consequences. My system's very lethal. I have wounds and stuff like that. Some people really don't like that, like the roll master and all that, but I do. The reason I do is because I think it's more cinematic, and I think it makes people not want to just rush into combat for every solution. You may beat that kobold, but he might get that one lucky shot that pokes your eye out with his stick or something like that. So you'll think twice about starting a fight just for the hell of it. And that's one of the things I wanted to have in it, is to root out the murder hobo mentality. So that's my new Ko-Fi stream bot. I turned that on last week. I forgot that I did it. I thought it was a spam bot. I was about to delete it and realized I turned it on. I do stuff on Ko-Fi. I make maps and some of these train generators. I do scenarios for war games and for fantasy skirmish and stuff like that on my Ko-Fi. Yeah, as far as I kind of follow the Gary with the timing. I think that one of the things is I've never been and have been hotly in fact, I don't know if you know who Frank Chadwick is, but me and him kind of butted heads years back because I didn't like the 15-minute turn scale he put in some of his war games. There was this design idea that the longer, well, we want to fast forward all those details because it's too much, it becomes burdensome, so they turn the time scale into some lengthy thing. But I think it should be short if it's a skirmish situation. So if you're in a dungeon or something like that, and combat is possible almost every moment, and if you do see something, it's not going to be very far away, maybe 15, 20, 30 feet, 50 feet at the most. It's seconds. I use, excuse me, I've got an itch on my ankle. Don't mean to lean in on you, but so I use the shorter time. And I use multiple scales. If you're not in contact as a DM, and I know I'll do minutes in the dungeon. When you are engaged, I'll do segments, 10-second segments. And the same thing with wilderness. If you're just going from place to place, I usually do 4 hours or whatever, approximately 4 hours phases. But if you're in a fight, then it's, depending on what scale it is, it could be minutes or something like that. So it fluctuates for me. I do that with my war games too, because I played a war game, and this is what happened is I conned I say conned, but I talked to a friend of mine into reducing the time scale because I felt it was necessary. So we liked big games with big tables, and we played just in the small time scale. And he goes, "This is boring and it sucks." And he goes, "I'm moving 20 tanks and they're only going 2 inches at a time. It looks like I'm pushing them with my finger." So I said, "All right, so you've got a point." So I went to like a minute or 2 minutes until their shooting starts. then I slowed it or changed it to seconds, and it worked out good because every second counts when you're in a fight. Yeah, that's what it is. It's exactly that. If you're in an encounter or you're in a fight, it changes. If you're just moseying on through the wilderness, getting from point A to point B, then it's a little bit of a different scale. And and that's how I do it with my game. My game's called Paracosmic Convergence. And I have it for war games and for role playing. Be the first, I don't not maybe not the first one, but one of the first ones I know that is specifically being sold to people as being a tabletop everything system. You could you could do hex encounter with it. You could do tabletop RPG. You could do skirmish miniatures. You could do micro armor, airplanes, navy, all of the above, all at one time, whatever you want. Yeah, I uh, I came across it looking for something. I'm a horrible typist, so it came by accident. I typed in something, and the autocorrect gave me paracosm, and I go, I've only heard that. I've heard that word, but I wasn't sure what it was. So I quickly read the Wikipedia entry for it, and they had Greenwood, and they had uh, Gary and Arneson as here's a list of paracosms or examples and people who made them, and they had Don Greenwood and J.R. Tolkien and Arneson and all these people, and I go, wow, yeah, man, that's what I want. And I wanted to have a system that did every genre, because I just get to the point. As much as I love D&D, I'm a personal fan of D&D. Well, I really love West End games and the D6. And as much as I love all that stuff, as you get older, you just keep switching back and forth and remembering all these rules. I just can't do it. So I wanted something where now I know the rules no matter what. And I can use that system to play any game I own or any game I want to make up or any scenario. So that's where it came from originally. And I have a little thing, and I've made some of my own worlds for it. And the convergence comes from, in my worlds, hidden kind of, I let a lot of things influence me, and then I didn't really copy from them, but let them influence me. And one was dimensional doors. It's very hard to find, but there's dimensional doors that connect all the different worlds I come up with. And one's Western, and one's modern, and one's fantasy, and one's sci-fi. And that's the convergence of the paracosms. And all my stuff is based off of the imagination of me and my peers as children when we were, you know, 10, 11, and 12 and stuff like that. And we were out in the backyard or the neighborhood lot or whatever, uh, playing with one another, playing army or trying to beat each other up with sticks and garbage can lids as knights or whatever it was. And we all had these little areas we went for each one. So I just turned them into RPG worlds and called them paracosms. So anybody can make whatever they want, and it can be used for any way. I'm using it to do a campaign I originally wrote for West End Games Star Wars. But there's a couple of reasons. I love that system, but it's hard for people to get a hold of the system. The last guy that tried found one manual cost $200, and I said, hey man, why don't we try this? I just came up with it. Everybody can use it without, paying out an arm and a leg. Try that way. Oh, it's impossible to dismiss the modern educated mind in a medieval setting. Well, I Yeah, I'll give you a shot. Let you play a demo and take a look at how it's done. Um, but I after listening to I got to meet Rob Kuntz at Gen Con years ago, and it was just, one of those, you make cool stuff, Mr. Kuntz. Can you sign my, one of those things. I mean, that's technically meeting him, and I got to talk to him for 2 minutes or whatever. But since he's shined around on Twitter, he's done a bunch of interviews, and I was really inspired with his idea of just kind of taking it back to a childlike imagination setting and just kind of running things that way. But as adults, if you're playing a game, you do need some structure. So there are, a real light framework of rules, and the rest is arbitrated just by your thought process, and like we were just talking about. But to play, you really need to do your best attempt to release your adult frame of mind and harken back to a time when you could, imagine without restriction or cynicism that sometimes comes with growing up a little bit. So yeah, I honestly, the logical song went through my head a lot when I was writing it. Um, if you know what I'm talking about, the Rush logical song, because you kind of do need to release your adulthood. So a lot of people find it interesting, the idea of crossing one of these portholes and going from, how do you keep a balance when you go from fantasy to sci-fi? Well, a couple of ways I do that is, it's very difficult to find these, and they're not everywhere. There's one per world, and there you have the opportunity to, as characters, to find some lore about the dimensional door and how it works, and even some hints as to what's on the other side, so that you can be somewhat informed before you make the choice to go through them. And some of that information is going to be, you don't want to start a fight. So, and because my system is really meant to try to discourage people from getting into a fight unless it's absolutely necessary, if you and your crossbow take a jaunt into the 20th century, you're going to learn real quick. You don't want to tangle with anybody, because until you figure out how their weapons work, if you can, and how you can get some if you need them, because you and your short sword aren't going to do real well. Yeah, that's what most people have trouble with. Yeah, so and the way to do it is instead of trying to find some way to balance a short sword versus an AK-47, it's more about making that, like I said, very difficult, and making sure that the players understand that they're going into something at a disadvantage, but without expressly doing it, because I want it to be something where they go, well, I don't have the mindset as it's hard to do. You have to suspend reality. You really have to act, because you of course do know what the modern world's going to bring you, because you're in it and you're playing as a fantasy person. So yeah, it's kind of hard to do. But I'm hoping people have enough imagination that they can play their characters from the perspective of not understanding modern civilization that much. So, but it's not a game about balance so much. I don't want to have people be sent into situations that are hopeless all the time, but I don't put a huge focus on making sure that you might bite off more than you can chew. You might find yourself like I said earlier, you might find yourself up against a giant when you're third level fantasy, and the moral of the story is, don't start nothing. Find a way out of that, run, hide, whatever. Talk your way out of it if you have to. Just don't draw your swords on everything around you all the time. So it's a bit of a learning experience, and people cannot be connected. The other thing I wanted was I wanted your characters to be like arcade level lives, because that's the way we play. We didn't play back in the day with just one and become connected to it like it was our pet, and then be devastated when we lost it. We wrote up a bunch of them, and we had one, and if they got good enough, they might be able to hire or hirelings and henchmen were what we used the other character sheets for. And if the first one dies, then we would just take over one of the hirelings and henchmen, like playing Pac-Man. Well, I lost one life number 2 up. And the flip side of that is, if you make it through, if you do have somebody that lives through the first couple of levels or whatever, now you really have a reason to be connected to it. This guy made it, because it's a big accomplishment to live through everything. So if people have to be tolerant of I'm likely going to die, unless you try to skirt around starting fights you can't finish or getting into them. So it's really more of a thinking man's thing than but only in that role-playing scenario. Now, if you want to go play World War II skirmish, right, load it up. Get that BAR rocking, or that MG42 spitting lead, because it's a different world. There's a different set of criteria. Now it's all about getting into the fight or finishing the fight or whatever. So it all depends on where you go with it or what you want to do with it. And I have stats for everything. I used a system of rating weaponry and units that make everything relative to one another. So if you're a gaggle of cavemen that throw rocks and have clubs, your rating is still, it can be put up against anything without reconfiguration. Basically, what I did is I used the West End Games Star Wars scale type of thing. I did something similar. And I did it with both size and with technology. So you don't have to have different stats for the same unit in different genres. They work anywhere. So those cavemen can walk through that door if they so desire, and you don't have to write out a whole new sheet for them. That's how I got that system going. So okay, you can do anything. Fantasy war game and skirmish, whatever you want to do. I got it for everything. It's a one-stop shop. But yeah, it comes with all the charts that I do and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Well, I hope people like it. I'm ready to put out the basic rule book and see how people receive it, and then from there, I got add-ons galore. The thing I can keep putting out more and more for it, because it's an engine that can run anything. So you want some Navy war game stuff? Okay, it can go anywhere. I got all the domain stuff. So how much it costs to build a fortress, and I got it for every genre. How much gold does it take to build a castle versus how much cash does it take to build a house or a fortress in 20th century or something, or 21st century or whatever. So, yeah. But I'm always talking about these DM things because it's a good way to lead into talking about the system, which is more about the imagination than about the procedure and the rules, which is kind of ironic because I was always a big fuddy-duddy that was playing hardcore stuff like Battletech and ASL and deep micro armor games like Harpoon. That was the stuff that I really loved, is that really hardcore stuff. But these days, not so much with people, and that's, they like to look at it like it's some antique and talk about it. Playing it, not so much. So this lets me play that kind of stuff without, and get people that might go, yeah, I'll give it a try. Because Harpoon isn't anything anybody wants to play these days. Yeah, yeah. Oh, I loved it. The BattleTech thing was my first sci-fi war game. I'd been playing nothing but historical until I saw BattleTech, and I had the battle droids, and then went back and got this BattleTech when they, after the lawsuit, and it was great. I loved it. Um, I didn't have a lot of the miniatures though, because I had already sunk a lot of cash into micro armor, especially Cold War stuff. I had regiments of Soviet equipment, and so yeah, yeah, the whole, right. It was, and I had a hard time getting people to play, because everybody goes, it's like taking an SAT class. Because back in the day, I don't know if they still do it, but when we took SATs, you had to like fill in circles with pencil, and if you didn't fill them in right, they didn't count because the machine couldn't read them. So they found it a little bit tedious. So now I've got it. You can play BattleTech, but you don't need BattleTech rules. It's very similar, but a little bit less paperwork involved. And I don't use hexes personally in dungeons, but you can do it in my system. The other thing I like about my system is I always give people options. I don't like to paint myself into a corner by saying this is the only way something can be done. Um, there's times where that has to be the way it is, for usually for obvious reasons. But if there's a way to give people different methods and still play the game, I'll do it, because too many times I've seen people go, "Oh, well, does it do this?" And you go, "Well, no, it doesn't." They go, "Oh, well, then I'm not interested, or I can't play it because I have to have this or whatever." So I, I always like to have the option. But the maps that I make, when it's a dungeon, the ones that I put on Ko-Fi, if it's a dungeon, it's squares. If it's the wilderness, it's hexes. Traditional. Yeah, filling in the bubbles, right? And people are like, "No, man, that game gives me carpal tunnel." So I came up with different ways to do it. But other than that, there's a lot of similarity. If you want to play BattleTech with it, I have my own giant battling robots, and I thought about just making them custom BattleTech stuff. But I've got a whole uh, my sci-fi world for my game was based off of this novel that I wanted to write. It was one of these big ambitious projects. It sounded great until it came time to do it. But I did make a lot of lore for it and a lot of outlines and stuff like that. And I decided I was doing it with a co-author, and we're never going to do it. She's Magenta's the one, the gal that I brought up on the beginning of the stream, who's usually my co-host. She's become very ill. It's unfortunate. So I took it and made it my sci-fi RPG world, and it's got some giant battling robots, too. So I've got that. It's kind of a Gamma World homage, and that was written years ago. So at the time we were writing it, the whole dystopian sci-fi thing was all the rage, and it was a dystopian sci-fi. Now everybody's kind of burned out on that, but that's my sci-fi, my own personal sci-fi. But you can play Star Trek in with it, Star Wars with it too. So, in fact, I've got a Star Wars or a Star Trek one-off that I've written for it, and I've got a Star Trek campaign for it too, which is kind of like the old, what was it, Federation versus Empire type of thing, where you got fleets or squadrons or whatever out there, that kind of thing. Yeah. But I've seen, as far as hexes and dungeons, I saw them back in the day. Some people did them, but I never did. I always used graph paper. So, yeah, yeah. I wrote it from Magenta. She wanted to try something other than. Well, she's very new to the hobby, and her first introduction was she bought Redbox years ago, but didn't have anybody to play with. So she played the Star Wars that I wrote. One of them, I've got a lot of Star Wars campaigns because I absolutely love Star Wars to death. I'll play it any day of the week, all day. I don't care. I could I could live playing that game. Um, so she played that, and she liked it. She had fun, and then she played a couple of one-offs of World War II, and she's been playing a Greyhawk that I'm doing. But she wanted to try Star Trek because she's a big Star Trek aficionado. And I said, okay, well, what era? And she's fairly old, and as old as I am. And so I figured and she liked Kirk, so I figured she wanted OTS, but she didn't. She wanted TNG. So, so I did it just on the edge of TNG, like real early, because I kind of prefer OTS myself. Is that the way they say it? OTS? That's not how they say it. Original series. Not OTS, whatever. The original series. Um, but the one-off can lead into a campaign depending on what decisions you make, depending on how it plays out. But you can play the campaign on its own if you want to. Yeah, yeah. She likes it all, but she wanted to play TNG because that's where most of her technical knowledge is, and she felt she needed technical knowledge to play the game because it was going to. She goes, I know you're going to put combat in, and I go, yeah, I'm kind of that way. So she says, I feel more comfortable with the technology. That way, I don't have to learn the technology and the game system. So we pick TNG, but it's real early. It's like equivalent to second season or something like that. But but it's not really based on lore. It's just what I did was I had a friend who wanted to play. Uh, this name is so hard to say. It's another '80s game that I used to love to play, but it's Starship Tactical Combat Simulator by FASA. Basically, the mass battles uh, RPG add-on for the FASA Star Trek, and it's a fun game once you figure out how to play it. The rules are written horribly as far as grammar and coherent statements, but we got playing it and we had a fun time. And he says, I want to try the Klingons this time. So we play some Klingons. Well, I want to see what the Romulans are like. So based on that, uh, we said we're going to take it to the next level. We're going to role play it. So we made role playing characters and put them on the Star Trek ships that we were fighting with one another. So it kind of led into this scenario. Well, I took that and took it to the next level and made a whole one-off adventure out of it. But if things go in certain directions in the one-off, it might lead to a campaign because I don't want to give anything away because I still need players if anybody wants to play. I loved FASA. I loved FASA everything. I thought those guys were great. Sometimes though, there were parts of their rule books where you thought, why? How come you didn't edit that? That's just word salad. And and there was a couple places in the Star Trek miniature game part that it wasn't that it was a complicated concept. It was like Yoda wrote it though, so we had to kind of figure that out. And once you did, it was great. It was a lot of fun, and it was not half as complicated as the old Task Force Games version. So that's where the Star Trek went out. And then I've got this, like I said, I've got the Star Wars. I'm begging people for Star Wars. I love it. I'm addicted to it, and I've got 5 campaigns for it. And I went to school with Scott Palter. I knew Scott. He was a friend of mine. He's passed on, but he was a friend of mine. And I kept up with him until he got ill, and then passed away. And I got to hang out with him and Koskinen and all those guys for a couple of times. And I'm a huge Star Wars fan. And when the RPG came, I was just absolutely elated, and I love playing it. But now I'll probably just use my system instead of West End Games, because, like I said, it's just too hard for people to get a hold of that stuff. It's so expensive now. But I've got it all, so I've got all the reference material, and I can convert it into my system. I've already made a conversion chart and everything, so that the dice get changed and everything properly. So I can do that. And I've got a Discord server. All I'm waiting for is willing people to play. Yep. Excuse me. But I got all these charts that I put in. Let's see, some of these I was going to talk about. Distances at which a visual or oral disturbance can be identified. This is from Armor Magazine. So I use stuff like that. Here's one from a Marine reference novel, 316.6. Supporting arms, observer, spotter, and controller, audibility of various actions. So this is the kind of stuff that I was saying DMs could use a lot of. Human speech. How far can you hear people talking if they're talking at a normal level? About 100 yards. If they're loud talkers, maybe a couple hundred, depending on the terrain that you're in. Stuff like that. Oh, to the Discord, sure. I can do that. I'm finally getting, guys, I'm kind of new at streaming, and I'm finally getting into the hang of the fact that there's a delay, but I'm still not got the timing just right. So if I seem like I'm moving past you, excuse me. I'm still working a little bit on my timing, and it doesn't. Sometimes it seems like the delay changes based on internet traffic because nothing's simple. Okay, here you go. Here's the link for you folks. I'm getting better with it. Thank you. Oops. My cut and paste isn't. There we go. It wasn't cutting. Now we got it. Come on, Mr. Paste. There we go. That is one of those short-term ones, so jump in ASAP. Yeah, we're playing Greyhawk currently. That starts up again. We kind of quit for the holiday rush, but that starts up again at on the 5th, provided I don't have a doctor's appointment, which I don't. Sometimes I have doctor's appointments on a Monday, but because I'm old and falling apart. But yeah, we're doing that one. I was in the middle of a Star Wars, and I do have 2 people that would jump in. But I could start over as easy as that too. And I have 5 different things for Star Wars, and I'll play any one of them. The biggest one is the one that I've got that we were currently playing. It's called Ash Worlds. The Star Trek I've never played before. It's called, God, I wrote it and I can't remember. um, what do we call that? Shadow of the Hidden Sword. That's right. And that's the one off. And it can lead into the campaign. So if we start over with the Star Wars, it'll be my system. The Greyhawk is OD&D. Because I don't, I mean, I used to play OD&D too, but I did it because of the 50th anniversary, and Rob Kuntz said he was going to play. And then a week later says, oh, something came up, I can't play. Shit. Yeah, I was going to play with Rob over the internet. And of course, as soon as Rob said he'd play a game with me, I went and told everybody that I've ever known in my life, hey, I might get to play with Rob Kuntz. You want to play? So now I've got a bunch of players that are, oh, yeah, I want to play with Rob. And all they've got is me as a DM doing Greyhawk. Damn it. But such is life. So I'm doing that one. And more people the merrier because it's old school. But I really do, at this point, I'm a little bit fantasied out, and I would love to play some sci-fi, Star Trek or Star Wars. So, or my own custom fantasy thing, which is kind of Gamma Worldish, I guess, as far as the theme. Though it's something I made up myself with Magenta. So there's some pretty wild stuff in it. Anybody ever want a war game? I can do that too. I love my war games. So anyway, I'll give you a, what else do we have for you here? Somewhere. Oh, I've got stuff. Well, I don't want to get too into the science stuff that'll really get to you. Distances you can smell. Here's another one. Like I say, I don't think enough people use smell. So I put in the distance you can smell, approximately. Strong odors, something like a skunk. If you're downwind, it can be a mile and a half. You can smell that stuff if the conditions are right. Moderate order, having trouble with the pronunciation. Odors, 10 to 100 feet, depending on the stuff. You know, faint odors, under 10 feet, usually a couple yards at the most. That's all you need. Just a little guideline. So if somebody's looking for, you know, I don't know why, but maybe some food, now you know when they could smell it. Of course, these could be radically changed for somebody that's of a different race that may have more acute senses, or something like, you know, an animal or monster that might wander up on you, stuff like that. I love using that kind of stuff. The other one was, where'd that go? Huh. Let's see what else. Anybody else? So what else was there? Yeah, just seeing at night is another one. What you can see at night, how far you can see it. Was basically all the material. There was one discussion about other what am I doing with the pronunciation? Sorry, folks, I'm tripping over my tongue. Geological things that deal with how terrain transitions, biomes and subcategories of them and stuff like that. So understanding biomes isn't too difficult. It's not too complex. Um, but if you're going to if you want to really use detailed, well put together random generators for large groups of or large places, like maybe a whole world or a whole continent or something like that, understanding biomes is a good thing to have. Like tundra, uh, that's probably one that a lot of people have heard of. Arctic, a cold, treeless area, very short growing seasons, and permafrost. And then how other biomes connect with these, so that you don't have terrain or regions that don't seem to make sense right next to each other. So, so knowing what connects with what just helps you make a chart that'll have the possibility of moving into the biome that would make sense. So you'd roll on say the tundra, and any terrain that might be adjacent to it, there'd be a small chance that would come up, and it would take you to the next chart. It would say, instead of writing down terrain, it would tell you go to the taiga or boreal forest biome, which there's a carnivorous coniferous forests with long winters and short summers, like the Lapland. Excuse me for my tongue twistedness. What I use for my sci-fi rules right now is my own set called Paracosmic Convergence. I'm trying to get people to take a look at it. I'm trying to demo it, and I really want to kind of do all my gaming using that system. It was originally written in West End Games. The Star Wars was West End Games Star Wars, and the Star Trek was originally written in Fastest Star Trek. Yeah, Rogue Scholar says the lakes, as far as how they work in random generation. Yeah, and in D&D they said, yeah, they don't work. You just gotta pencil those in on your own. But if you want to make lakes and rivers work, what you need is to consider elevation, and it gets a little bit more detailed, where you just don't have planes. What elevation are they at? And adding that layer does add complication to the generator, but it can be done, and I do have it. I put it under advanced, but it makes it a little bit more three-dimensional. And where there's some lowlands and stuff like that, that's where rivers can start to generate. It gets kind of sim earthy, but if you want to make a whole system, that's it. As far as hex crawls and making rivers, and you don't want to get into that much detail, there's a way to do it, but you have to I've been having a hell of a time with pronunciation, so let me make sure I get this right. Geomorphic terrain features. If you've ever played Advanced Squad Leader, or heard of it, or Panzer Blitz, or any of those 70s and 80s tactical war game systems, a lot of them had the geomorphic boards, and all that is that any terrain feature for a road or a river starts in the center of the hex line. It can meander in whatever direction you want, but it has to end in the same position on the other side of the hex, in the middle of the hex line. That way, they just become puzzle pieces. So you can randomly generate them as long as you have the artwork that is done in the geomorphic sense, and you just have a random amount of that. So they all get put together. Then you can randomly generate a river. But yeah, sometimes it may not look all that right because it may take turns that don't seem to jive right unless you use the elevation. But I think most people would go, that's too much of a pain in the neck to do. So you might want to just adjust it accordingly. Hello, Typin Pal. I hope I got that right. Typin Pal. I need a Typin Pal because I type horribly. I am not well versed in foreign languages. Sorry, Typin. I'm one of those silly Americans that is not really bilingual. Sorry. Yeah, and there's another thing. This doesn't have to be just about Earth stuff. A carnivorous forest seems like a really cool fantasy terrain feature, and we should put that in there. In fact, this reminds me, that kind of spitballing, you lots of very ingenious things, very imaginative. I invite you, hopefully on Wednesday, if not next week, based on my counterpart there, Magenta. She's having some health issues, as I've mentioned. But one of the things we do on these lives, and probably the funnest activity I've done, is collaborative world building. I have a system that randomly generates a continent size map, and we fill it in with names, places, what monsters are there. We give all the regions a government, a economy, a culture, a military, all that sort of stuff, and just generate these continent size worlds. And they're a blast to do. And we work with everybody who's on the live with us, spitballing ideas and putting things together. And feel free to join. You got some good imagination. I think you'd be great with that. Last time we came up with some really great ideas. There was a Japanese fellow that was there with us, and we came up with a country that was based off of a dragon cult religion, where they took their criminals up into the mountains where black dragons roosted in order to hatch their young, and sacrifice their criminals to the dragon gods. and so their country was filled with dragons. All these dragons would come because there was free eating, and they'd also sacrifice livestock to them and things like that. And it was becoming a nuisance to their neighbors because the dragons were hanging out all over the neighbors' area, the adjacent countries, and so they had their own economy that was based on dragon fertilizer, and the dragons they would anneal a special material to make it ultra hard, and that became the basis for a lot of weapons that this country made. And they were selling the weapons to the neighbors and all sorts of stuff. So they were very oppressive, and they had decimated a previous dwarven civilization in the mountains. So there was these dwarven resistance fighters that were going to. We had all sorts of stuff going on. It was really a lot of fun. You should come. Everybody's invited. The more the merrier. So it's a blast to do. Yeah, yeah. Everybody's got their own brand, which is cool. Everybody's making one. Yeah, what we do is we just th- you can come on up. We give you a link, and you can talk to us on the mic if you want, or if you just want to chat in the chat and give ideas and suggestions. We're open to everything. We just kind of talk about stuff. The Japanese fellow, I forget his name now because I forget everything, unfortunately, but he came up with a country that had an internal war that was the surface and the underworld. The surface was very cold and frigid and run by ice wizards, and the underworld was very hot and had steam demons and fireworms and stuff like that. And currently, the ice surface people were winning. And one of the things that reasons they were winning is they had found a way to capture the steam demons and entomb them, or probably better put is entrap them into a kind of steampunk type of weaponry where they would power these cannons, ice cannons, and stuff like that. It's really ingenious. And this fella came up with all that, and we thought it was so good, we just put it right in and added it, all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah. Completely collaborative. And then the idea is once it's finished, it's going to be one of the worlds that we will use to demo the paracosmic convergence, and anybody who's contributed is invited to come and make a character and play, and we'll do a campaign, sandbox campaign in the world that we all created. Yeah, we just thought it's really neat to just do something together, and the more people in there, the better. Now, if it starts to get real busy, maybe not every idea will get picked up and put in or anything like that. But as long we had 5 or 6 people in the last couple of sessions, everybody was super chill. There wasn't any egos about, oh, I want my stuff in, or you're doing it, or you're stealing it, or anything like that. Everybody was just open to just coming up with cool ideas. So we don't want to commercialize it because that's not fair to the people that can do it. It's just going to be an open world. We do want to play our game in it. We at least go do that. But it's open to everybody, and we want to just do some sandbox campaigning. When it's all done and finished, let's go. Where you want to go? Who do you want to take with? So there's 2 continents so far. We're about 90% done with one, and we're ready to start on. Then we'll start on the next one. And we want them to be continent in the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere of the same planet, and those would be fantasy. Then we want to go do sci-fi. We also wanted to do a horror one. We never really got to it in Halloween. It kind of got away from us, but we wanted to do one for Halloween, and that wasn't going to be a whole world. It was just going to be like, what we wanted to do was kind of a supernatural meets Cthulhu type of deal, where it was going to be a county in the rural Midwest. So there'd be one city that isn't huge, but isn't just a tiny village. And then everywhere else would be the typical, like northern Wisconsin or Minnesota type of small town, a church, a gas station, a couple of houses, not much else. And it would just be filled with people's nightmares. We didn't want any Dracula, any Frankenstein, or any of that stuff. It's all been overdone. We love the classics, love the classic monsters. We just wanted people's raw nightmares put in there, and make this, just make it a small little area to investigate. Yeah, yeah. We just thought that would be great. And then, some sci-fi planet or something like that we could do whatever with. But yeah. So we got some people that join the server that just want to do that. And kind of took a break from it for a while because some of the contributors couldn't do it anymore, but we want to start it up again. And we came up with doing some of these ideas, but we wanted to get back to that. Yeah, I mean, like I say, I love Hammer, and I love the old original stuff. Lugosi and all that. It's classic. It deserves but we wanted to do something without that. No Dracula, no Frankenstein, none of that stuff. We've all seen enough of it. Let's do something different. So, but yeah, totally be like just Kolchak, Buffy, Supernatural, kind of players, and whatever nightmares and crazy stuff people could come up for monsters and horror stuff like that. But yeah, that was what we were going to do. But those kind of characters, just TV type of stuff, just for make it funny and fun. And we're all in the Midwest. Well, me and Magenta are in the Midwest, and so we were just going to do a lot of tropes and kind of laughable, stereotypical things that come out of the Midwest, especially Wisconsin, because that's where we're at. So, going to at least be one UFO encounter because northern Wisconsin, it's kind of a thing. I don't think it's real, but it happens all the time. So we were going to just do that as a lark and everything else. Yeah. Okay. So Minnesota, Wisconsin, those kinds of, we're just going to make those references and stuff like that. So just kind of make it a generic Midwestern deal. Yeah. And then for sci-fi, whatever we come up with, we haven't really thought that far out, but we wanted to do one of those. I even wanted to do a Western one, but everybody goes, "How can you do that?" I mean, they're all the same, and I go, "Yeah, they kind of are." Yeah, I'm not. I used to live closer to Lake Geneva than I do now, but yeah. And a friend of mine told me, I don't know if this is still the case, but he did some research. Excuse me, he did some research, and he said that Milwaukee, which is the largest city, has more game stores per capita than anywhere else in the country. And I believe it because for a while it kind of dried out, but there's a lot of them that have come back. There's a couple in Lake Geneva, around Lake Geneva, but Milwaukee's filled with them. Madison's filled with them. The capital's got a bunch of them too. But yeah, they're everywhere. Yeah. They're not as good as they used to be, though, quite frankly. A lot of them now, you go in there and they're just a small room with a cash register, a display case, and a bunch of magic cards, and not much more. And if you're a Magic player, great for you. But back in the day, they were spectacles, and they had all sorts. I mean, it's harder for people, and their business is different and all. I get it, but years ago, we had places like Napoleon's in Milwaukee, and it was a grand old place with all. I mean, it just had everything. It was really great. Yeah, a lot of them are that. They have several of them have the comic book door and the game door and a little divider and all. They're kind of cookie cutter, a lot of them, but they used to not be like that back in the day. There was Fritz's was Napoleon's. Napoleon's, you walk in there and they had old suits of armor, and he had a prop from Hollywood that he bought that was a MG 42 machine gun wasn't real. It was a prop, but he had it hanging up there, and coats of arms, and uh, with the mace cross on them, and all sorts of cool shit. And it was an old building. Place was crazy. It had carpeting, but every time you took a step, you could hear wood creaking because they had carpeted over this old wooden place. It was awesome. A bunch of pictures of Napoleon and stuff like that on it. And then you would go to War Game Room, and it looked like a bunker on the inside and the out. And inside there was this old guy with a flak jacket, Gary, and he was a cop and a soldier. So everything was all done like barracks and stuff like that. And he had an Atari in the corner with a whole bunch of games. And there's always this. He didn't have a babysitter for his kids, so his kids were in this little cubbyhole playing Atari. While you're playing the game, you can hear the Atari going beep 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 beep. They all had a little bit of a different personality and stuff like that. Now a lot of them are all the same. Yeah, they're all so but it's cool. I mean, it's better than nothing, but the old places were a lot better, in my opinion. They had tables you could play on and stuff like that. So yeah, a lot of great stuff. Man, he had everything. He had a whole Avalon Hill shelf, and the SPI stuff was with it. And then there was all the miniatures on pegboard, just a whole wall of it. Some of it was so high you had to ask the guy to come over and get it. And it was like a library. He had one of those ladders on the rail. And he'd roll the ladder around on the track and then crawl up and get what you wanted because the stuff was stacked so high. Man, it was great. This guy had everything. Yep. And then War Game Room, there was a military surplus store, just kitty corner to it. And he sold models for miniatures, and this was great, man. It was great. They'd come over and play with their models. They'd bring the models over that they had built, walk them across the street, play at the War Game Room with them. Yeah, that was fun. Yes, sirree. So, yep, there's some ideas. What else do I got? Right. Yeah, back in the 80s, the 70s and 80s were great with that stuff. There's more conventions. They weren't big, but there was I one time, this was the greatest thing. Real hot summer day, Milwaukee, 83. And I was with my buddy. We were what were we doing? Oh yeah, he was looking for this place. It was he couldn't find it. We didn't have GPS or any of that crap. And he was like, I want to make sure I know where this place is before I come down, because it was they repaired washing machines, like clothes washing machines. He says, before I put this thing in a car and get lost, I want to know where it is. So he kind of did this recon mission. So we go and we find the place, and it's really hot, and he doesn't have air conditioning in his car. And I go, let's go get a drink or something. And so we're walking to this bar, and it was so hot. I says, this church has a water fountain. Let me just go in here for a second. And it was like Saturday afternoon, and the doors were wide open. And I saw the water fountain on the other side. I walk inside, and there's games everywhere. There's people playing Rogues Trader, the original Rogues Trader. And they walk up, they say, are you here to play? I am now. I didn't know this thing existed. I had no idea it was going on. It was a little local church in a small little neighborhood area of Milwaukee. There was they were playing. There was a game convention. You could literally just trip over them back in the day, and so we went in and we played all afternoon. Screw the bar. We went and played Rogues Trader and Panzer Blitz and Blue Max. Played all day. It was great. Yeah, they had Blue Max, the old GDW Blue Max, which I love. I have that in Dawn Patrol at home, but they were playing Blue Max there, and they were playing with 1/44th miniatures, and then they had Rogues Trader, which was, isn't that what it's called, Rogues Trader? Yeah, the original 40K Rogues Trader. I'm getting that right? The first version. And yeah, Rogue Trader. Yeah, the first one. They were playing that, and all sorts of stuff. And I said, did you take out a newspaper ad? He goes, well, we put some flyers around the area. I went, shit. So yeah, it used to be great. And Gen Con was in Milwaukee for years. And it was the greatest spectacle ever. There is no better gaming experience than Gen Con in Milwaukee. It was always good. And I went to the ones in Kenosha technically Racine, but Racine, Kenosha area and all that. But when they got to the big time, when they got to Milwaukee, wow, 50,000 people a day. That was fun. You play games you'll never play again. And that's why I like to have the Discord server, and I want to play some of these bigger campaign games, because there's nothing better than playing, with 15, 20 people or more in one game. It sounds like it would be hard to do and all that, but I did it. The Star Wars miniature games. How's it going, Rob? The Star Wars miniatures games alone was one of the greatest ones ever. So I go to Gen Con. I don't remember what year this was. I think it was the late 80s, early 90s. I go with a buddy of mine, and we're walking around looking at everything. Guy runs over. He says, he came running. He sent his key, brought his kid. His young kid comes running. He says, Uncle Chip. They all called me Uncle Chip. He says, Uncle Chip, you got to go look at this. And I was kind of annoyed because I was checking out something. And he goes, you got to see this. Whatever you're looking at, you're going to want to look at this instead. Okay, so I went over there. And as the crowd parts, I get near this place. This is the first time I've ever seen one. Now a lot of people are doing this, but at the time I'd never seen anything like it. There was a 4-foot long styrene plastic Star Destroyer model, and right next to it was the Battlestar Galactica, the original one, maybe about 3.5 foot long. These things they looked like studio models. They were awesome. And I was like, oh, that's neat. I like to look at models, but I do prefer games. And there was a chick that was working at the booth, and she says, we're playing games with these tomorrow. What? Holy socks, Jack. So I went and played. They used Galoob micro machines. That's how I know it was the 90s, because it was Galoob micro machines. And they had these giant models, and they played Star Wars Mass Combat. This is obviously years before Armada, but just think of Armada with giant ships and and fighters on, and they were all on dowels. You could walk them around on the floor. It was a miniatures game you played on the floor. They made you take off your shoes so you didn't step on anything. And we didn't play with 1 or 2 people. There must have been 30 or 40 people around this thing. We had people commanding squadrons. We had people commanding sections of the batteries on the Star Destroyer. There wasn't just one guy running the Star Destroyer. There was like 10 guys, you know, and it went super fast because they had more than one DM or GM, and they could do things all at once. They, one guy go over there and go, okay, guys, we're going to run all the gunnery for the Star Destroyer. And he'd go through all of it and coordinate with everybody else. And with the multiple people on the staff, it made this giant game run super quick. That's what I want to do. Never had more fun than doing that stuff. So anyway, this isn't exactly the subject matter that I started with, but it's real easy to divert me into nostalgic war stories. Sorry. Oh, well. Yeah, and I mean, just that was it though. It was this giant. They had those like pylons that had the belt that would come out and would like instantly rope off a place. They had those, and they just roped off just this giant area of a floor on the second level, right near Kilbourne Avenue. And you could play. The Star Destroyer was so cool. It was so heavy that they had like the old office chair caster wheels for it. And it was sitting on this stand that raised it up to about here on me, and it was so cool. And they had that for a bunch of stuff. They had it for Battlestar Galactica and Star Trek and Babylon 5 and all sorts of stuff. Anything that you could get, fighters for, they had it. Wow, it was awesome. And that was just one of the really cool things at Gen Con that I saw. I played Axis and Allies on a globe. Not a map, a globe. And a globe so big I couldn't put my arms around it. There was a guy playing on the other side. It was so damn big I couldn't even see him. I had to walk around the globe to see the opponents. We were all standing around this globe. And when it came your turn, they would just slowly turn it to your area. Awesome. Oh man, it was so fun. And I mean, you can't replicate that online, but I love to play games with a lot of people. The old Dawn Patrol games on Saturday morning, where I played on a bunch of those. 100 people, 100 planes, giant table, and just 100 miniatures and 100 people. Each person had a miniature, 100 planes, Axis versus Allies in the air, Dawn Patrol. Mike Carr was running it. It was great. Yeah, they were all on a magnetic globe. It was it was the coolest thing, man. And Battletech. There was a company called Armorcast in the late 80s that made mechs out of resin. And they were maybe about 1.5 feet high, these giant mechs. And they made some tanks, and they had some elementals, and then they had terrain that was all to scale. And it was the same deal. You had to take off your shoes, and they had little places where you could step. You could only step in certain places because they wanted to minimize these things getting stepped on. And they played on the floor. All miniatures, no hex, just using measuring sticks and stuff like that. This giant Battletech board. Someday, if you look, there may still be, there may still be a picture of some of this stuff. They sold them for a while. Then they kind of went under. I don't know why or what happened. Probably not enough demand to make it work. But Armorcast made a bunch of stuff. They used to make good tanks too. Let's see. I can show you one. I think this will show up. It's kind of small, but here's a product. And I think that miniature next to it is like a 25 millimeter miniature, give you an idea of the size. Pretty neat. So yeah, we used to do stuff like that. And I got stuff for all that. All with my paracosmic conversions. Instead of having, like I said, making people buy all these old games if they don't have them or learn them all. I could do Dawn Patrol with World War One. I could do all that stuff. I don't copy the rules, but I just kind of do, my version thereof. Quicker, easier, but just give you the vibe. You can do it all. Yeah, that was one of the greater ones. The Armor Cast one. They did I played in a West End Games Star Wars miniatures battle, and they used the 25 millimeter lead miniatures that they made. And then they used for an AT-AT, they had the old Kenner toy AT-AT, and it looked pretty close to scale. But and then they had a couple of other vehicles that were resin cast, that were made by Armor Cast, that were made for West End Games, but they had the old AT-AT out there. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. We're going to keep doing this. We do Wednesdays, Monday and Wednesdays is kind of an open thing. We usually start out by doing a little talk about something, and it typically ends within an hour, hour and a half, and then I usually stay on and just kind of open chat with people. I just like hanging out on the phone, just talking about stuff. That's typically what happens on these shows. So, well, for a while we were doing longer shows where we talked for quite a bit at a time, and we figured, let's just open up the floor. So, but we're going to do the world building again, and those will go as long as anybody wants to go with those because they're so fun. I was on Rumble. As far as lives, I was on Rumble, and they changed the way that you interface with their live, and I'm trying to figure out how to fix it so I can broadcast back on it. But I'm also on Twitch and Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Kick. As far as live goes, that's where it's at. Here's what I do with Rumble. Sometimes I don't want to make myself sound too bad, but occasionally I'll get a little grouchy and I'll put something on Rumble, or I'll put something on Rumble that I think might not do well on YouTube. So the material on Rumble is a little bit more coarse and a little bit not foul or anything, but a little bit different than the stuff on YouTube as far as the stuff that I make as videos. The lives are all the same. I just multi-stream to everything I can. Oh, good, Rob. Yeah, we're happy to have you come. That'll be coming up. I have a co-host, and unfortunately, she's quite ill. Hopefully, she'll get better. She wants to be involved. Maybe do that Wednesday if she gets better in time. Otherwise, we're going to wait one more week to do it, just to get her over the hill with the illness, hopefully. And things don't really get rolling for a lot of people until after the first of the year anyway. So, but yeah, we definitely want to do that again. And like I say, games, got them. Want to play? Hit the Discord. Looking for players. Star Wars, Star Trek, Dawn Patrol. You ever heard of Patton's Best? Here's another little thing. If you're into World War II and you like role-playing and you want to mix role-playing with World War II, Patton's Best. It's an old Avalon Hill war game, but we've taken the premise and we've added a little bit of RPG to it. And we have it for, now we've got add-ons. I have a friend in Japan that made add-on material. Patton's Best is just Sherman tanks. But you've got Guderian's Best where you can be in Panzers. You got Stalin's Best where you can be in, and now he's finally finished with Churchill's Best. So you can be the British, the Americans, the Russians, or the Germans, World War II tank commander. And it's kind of a mix of RPG and skirmish wargaming scenarios. A lot of fun. We're also doing what we call tactical decision games. The tactical decision games, I make a map, I make a scenario, and we have people like yourselves that are subscribed write in and give us what you think is the way to solve this tactical problem. For example, um, you and your party of adventurers have been ambushed by uh, 20 goblins in a narrow forest pass. What do you do? Stuff like that. When everybody writes in, there's no judgment, there's no right or wrong answer. Well, all we do is we pick a few of them out of the hat. We discuss them on a live, and then we have the viewers vote, and just to see who they think came up with the best idea. And whoever wins gets the map in PDF form, little skirmish map. That's a little contest thing we're starting to do. There's the yeah, the OD&D is I got talking to Rob Kuntz, and I said, I think you know my uncle. My uncle worked with didn't work for TSR, but he worked with TSR. He was in packaging and marketing for a company, and his account was TSR all the way up through Lorraine Williams, from day one to the last day of Lorraine Williams was pretty much he did this stuff. So he's kind of my introduction into D&D and TSR, and he worked with a lot of artists and got to meet a lot of the people, and he got me to meet a lot of the people. And I had the opportunity to meet Rob, and Rob says, I'm pretty sure I drove with your uncle from Elkhorn, Wisconsin to Lake Geneva. And I says, I believe you're right. You told me a story. So he said to me, on Twitter, he says, I would like to play again. And I says, please come to my Discord to play. And he says, okay, we'll play. I haven't been a player in a long time. And I says, that okay. And he said, I have to figure out how to use my headphone. I don't know how to set it up right. I'm going to have a friend set it up for me, and I'll get back to you and we'll play. Okay. And then he came back and he says, I just got an opportunity to start on a project, and I won't have time to play at least till fall. Well, now it's January and he still isn't here, unfortunately. So that's okay. Things happen. But I was really excited with the idea of being able to play with Rob. But he's on the server still. He's under his name, Robalar. And anyway, so I told everybody, hey, I'm going to play OD&D with Kuntz. And a bunch of people join, and of course, it's just gone from there. So we play that on Sundays. Yeah. Everybody likes Rob. He's cool. It's great. But things happen. He got a chance to make those adventures and to make some other stuff, and so I understand. You got to do what you got to do. But I was this close to getting that dude for a player, man. I was all hyped up about it. But so we're playing the OD&D, and okay. What's my here's my Twitch. I tell you what. Here is. But anyway, that's what I got into. I got into D&D with that, and I got to go to all the Gen Cons because of that. Got to meet guys like Zeb Cook. Got to meet Arneson. Got to, and when I say meet, it's again, it's just hi, how you doing, that kind of stuff. Gary. Gary was nice. He go, well, what do you play? What's your current campaign? He was very interested in hearing what I did with D&D more than just, oh, great kid, you play. Thanks for buying my stuff. He wanted to know what I was doing. He was very, very kind. And then he saw me after the meeting walking by. And, hey, hi, there's that. And he kind of reached out to me from the crowd to say hi again, which was super cool. He was a very nice man. It was really great. Uh, really neat opportunity. Yeah, the whole. I mean, yep, the whole thing was bad with the way that the company was run and all that, and all the issues were unfortunate. I was a little bit young to. I mean, my uncle told me about it and all that stuff, but I was I just want to play the game, man. But yeah, I got to meet some really cool people and go to Gen Con for free and all that stuff. So that's what got me started with the game. Yeah. So that I got TSR complimentary through that relationship. So I have all of my TSR stuff up to first edition. I never when second edition came, I didn't want it. Not because I hated it that much or anything like that, but they being TSR, I found out that they had bought the rights to Avalon Hill SPI and those war games, and they were redoing a lot of the old SPIs under the TSR label. And Tony says, I can't just raid that company for every little product that you want. And I said, well, okay, I'd like to switch from role playing to the war games now that you have SPI. So he started bringing me those box games instead of second edition. So my collection stops at first edition with D&D. But then I met Poulter when I went to school, Scott Poulter from West End Games, and we were pals. So, and I loved West End Games. I loved their war games. I loved their role playing games. So I went out and I made sure I bought it. He wouldn't comp me everything or anything like that, but I bought his stuff because I liked Scott and I liked the games. So I have a lot of. I didn't buy everything, but I bought almost everything. I've got a lot of their war games and I've got all their Star Wars stuff and things like that. So I wish I could have bought more of it, but I do have a couple of their other ones. But all their Star Wars stuff, I bought all of that. So that's that's my Discord. I thought I was going to put out all my links. How come that didn't work? I just hit the link. Why didn't that work? Let's try it again. Somebody asked for all my stuff, and then I tried to put it out there, and it didn't work. Let me get it. Okay, here we go. Come on, work this time. There we go. There's all my links. So that'll take you to everything. And there's some of those things on there. What do we got? I got Ko-Fi, I got Kick, Command, Post, Gaming, and Face. I do have Facebook. I'm trying to figure out how the hell to use Facebook. I've got a place called Getter. I joined it because I just join everything I ever find. I don't know what Getter is. It seems a little weird to me. It doesn't have a lot of stuff on it, but I'm there. Why not? Haven't been doing much with, let's see, start playing. No, I do have a start playing page. Instagram, got that. And the old Twitter. So yeah, I'll send it out. It's on my bio on Twitter too. But yeah, for a hot second I thought that anyway, start playing. That's a good thing to do. I'll be a pay for DM. Not a lot of people want to pay for it, and so, and it's. I think that the whole pay for DM thing only lasted through the COVID issue. I don't think anybody really wants to pay for it. So, but I've got the page. But yeah, that's how I got started with the RPGs, is through TSR and all that stuff. But I really do like creating my own stuff. I like creating my own systems. It's not the only RPG I'm working. The Paracosmic Convergence is the big one. I've got a smaller, more military geared one as well. But I want to start making one of the things I wanted to do was make modules or one-offs for RPGs, but not for a system and not system agnostic. I wanted the here's all the rule do this. Here's all the rules that you need to play this system and make it or this one-off. Make it specific to that module. So you don't have to have some overwhelming thing, and you can have some variety and stuff like that and just sell the whole package. So I've got a bunch of those made up, and they're going to come out soon too. Because I really like the idea of rulings and not rules these days. But I'm a not. There's a lot of people that don't like that premise, so I went ahead and made my RPG anyway, which can do everything. So, but yeah, check it out. I talk about everything. I got about 120 videos on YouTube. I just started, so not everything is solid. There's some mistakes, and some of it's a little bit shaky because you got to figure out what you're doing, and all that. But I'm getting better, I think, and now I've got the co-host, which helps out a lot when she's available. So, but we like to run the games because it's neat to play, and I think having a sense of community and having a little spot where everybody can check things out and get involved and see what kind of stuff we're doing is a great way to just showcase it instead of just read my ad. I always like demos. Another thing with Gen Con, it was great. You didn't have, if you could, in Milwaukee at Gen Con, you didn't have to sign up for any damn games. You could spend the whole 4 days inside the exhibit hall where they were selling products, because everybody that was selling a game had a demo, a playable demo right at their booth. So you could just play demo games all day in the exhibit hall. Some people did that. And I think it's the best way to market your stuff is to let people have access to it and look at it and play it. That's why I like to do mine. Reflex, Ayo. How's it going? So yeah, I'm excited to get it out. It hasn't come out as fast as I wanted it to, but I think that's common. There were some, how do I do this right? There was a little bit of hesitation on my point. I'm new to this too. And I think I want it to be perfect. And I wasn't sure who to go through to do it right, how to market it. And then there was an artwork issue, which is par for the course. And so that slowed things down. But I got it all ironed out. Unfortunately, not in time for the holiday season, but such is life. And it's not the only thing like I said, it's not the only thing I'm working on. I'm working on a war game too. If anybody's a war gamer, I got that going. And that's just the start, just the one war game. So it's kind of a paracosmic convergence thing too, but it's its own war game. So if you do that, yeah, I'm not exactly at. I mean, I live in an apartment building, for lack of a better description, and they have a deal that when the internet's part of the rent, and I can't pass that up economically, but it means I'm not at full speed. So that's probably why it's taking a long delay. But it's free, so. And I keep thinking you ought to just get the full thing. And I thought, yeah, that's you talking as a gamer. That's not talking you as a financially responsible adult. So yeah. But yeah, I got a war game uh, for anybody who's still into those. I'm actually going to make a couple of those, but yeah. So uh, I got a portion of the Paracosmic. Like I say, it can do anything. So I've got fantasy wargaming as well, kind of like chainmail for it, and a domain system. Right now, I'm doing the domain system. Uh, I'm showcasing it through Star Wars because why shouldn't I have some fun too? And I like Star Wars so much that I wanted to play the domain using Star Wars. So if anybody wants to do that, that's currently running. We have just a few people, and we could put as many people into it as we want. There is no limit. I have it all set up to run. I'd love to see people play that. Um, as far as connection and paying for it, the one thing about not having free or paid for internet is I was just gifted over the Christmas holiday a ton of games that I'd love to stream, and I'm toying with it if I have time for that. No, it's not for sale. I just have I have a domain system for my game, and we're using it to do a Star Wars game on Discord. So it's not anything I'm publishing like. Well, I mean, there's a few pages of guidelines for the game, but there's no commercial publishing or anything like that. No. Basically, all it is it's an RPG campaign for Star Wars with a war game veneer over it. So you can play as a role playing uh, person. You could be like a rebel uh, operative and do role playing scenarios, or you could be, say, a rebel fleet commander and be part of the war on the military side and play uh, a Star Wars war game. No, yeah. Let me tell you about calling that up. If anybody's still listening to this, Lucas, man, here's what's up. So when I first did this, I did it inside a game store that I had some years ago. I actually had a retail shop, and I said, I'm going to do this, and I better call them just to make sure, because I have seen personally some things at a I saw Lucas do stuff a distributors convention. I went to a distributors convention in Fort Wayne, Indiana, for Alliance Distributor. They were one of my distributors for my store, and they went after this kid about a Star Wars helmet that he made. Wow! So I called them up, and their default position is to just yell at people. They're just mean. They don't even need to be. And I said, I'm playing this game in my store. I want to make sure that's okay. And the guy just started yelling at me. He says, "Are you selling anything? Are you doing anything?" And I says, "No, it's my." He says, "I don't give a shit what you're doing in your store with your models." And I said, "Hey, I just thought it was courteous to talk to you about this, you know, because it's Star Wars related material. Do you really have to yell at me?" And the guy goes, "Do you know how many calls like yours I get a day?" And I go, "Well, okay. Lots of companies get lots of calls. You don't have to be like that." And they were just ruthless, just mean. But he said, "Yeah, I don't care. You can do that stuff. There's no problem with that." But yeah, and I talked to Watsy because I bought the Axis and Allies miniatures and stuff like that direct from Watsy. That's how long ago this was. But the gal that was the representative that I dealt with Watsy's like, "Oh, they're just insufferable. They're horrible about it. She goes, we hate it too. And no offense, but we're WotC. We're a lot bigger than you, and they're dicks to us too. So, okay. Yeah, they were just awful. They made that kid, they made that kid cry. They scared the hell out of him. He was just a 14-year-old kid. All he did was, so we go to this convention just for distributors, and some guy brings his little brother, his little 14-year-old brother, just because he likes gaming and he want to hang out. No problem, whatever. So the kid brings this Darth Vader helmet that he had made himself. And if your head wasn't abnormally large, it fit most people's head. And when you put it on the brow of the visor, if you just took your eyes and looked up, there were 5 hand painted with a single hair brush scenes of Anakin's journey, from, the fall to the redemption. It was a gorgeous piece of art. And it was just, that's all it was a piece of art. The guy had, and they screamed at that kid so loud, everybody in the hall looked to see what was going on and threatened to sue him. It was just something he made that he put in his basement, and he took it to this thing because he thought it'd be cool to show people. And they, wow. Man. I mean, I get it. You want to protect your IP. No problem with that. But I think they come at you way too hardcore. Yeah. I get it. They just, their volume doesn't need to be at 11, especially with a 14-year-old kid who wasn't looking to harm anybody. He I mean, but and then it turns out that sometime later there was this helmet that they had made, this product that was, I mean, it didn't have the artwork, but it was that's why they really wanted to jump on it. But it was like, all you had to do was just, take hey, son, thanks for your help. This is a beautiful piece of art. We just got this thing, that's all you had to do with a kid. You didn't have to. This kid was ready to cry. He thought he was going to get sued into oblivion. So, but yeah, it's just a game, and there's no products or anything like that for sale. So it's just role playing. But yeah, you can, if you, probably the best way to explain it or to give somebody an idea of what we're doing is, if you've ever played the old PC game Rebellion in England, I think it was called Supremacy or Empire at War. It's kind of like that, but just using RPG and role war game elements to play it out. Yeah, using my paracosmic convergence rules. It was really fun, and I love my Star Wars. I love my West End games, and I'm not using West End games because I want to promote my rule set, and I looked at the prices for West End game material on eBay, and no one's gonna. If you want to collect that stuff, great, but no one's gonna buy it just to play a game. It's too expensive. So I know there's retro clones and stuff like that, but I really like. I want to play my system. So that's what we're doing with that. But yeah. So I hope everybody liked my little dissertation on DMing. I will. Yeah. Yeah. No, they were pretty tough, but I get it. I understand I've heard the stories, and he's got this, the THX1138 thing was, and all that. But damn, it was just a kid, But yeah. So oh, good. I'm glad everybody enjoyed it. Sometimes I wonder if listening to old man reminisce has any entertainment value, and I always tend to kind of drift off into into story time after I'm done with my DM talk. Yeah, well, I mean, and he said that really wasn't what I was looking to make, and this, by the time I got it funded and all that, everybody had their hands in the pot, and he wasn't going to go through something like that or the holiday special or anything like that ever again. So I understand being vigilant, um, but you can be vigilant and not Jesus yelling. So yeah, yep. But yeah, we do Star Trek too, but it's not stuff for sale. Um, just the stuff that the paracosmic convergence is. But it's one of those things where you can just take any IP. I mean, if you want to play, a Transformers game you make up in your basement, they can't come after you for that. So if you're using my set and whatever skin you want to put over it. So that's the thing. I've got it where you can make your own stuff up. You can make your own monsters. You can make your own enemies of all sorts. It's got a little set of guidelines and stuff like that. Uh, so DMs can and world makers can come up with their own stuff. And if you want to, like there's things on I forget the name of it, but there's like a spaceship design thing, and somebody's made a star destroyer and and the Enterprise and all that stuff in those games, the same kind of thing. If you want to use that design system to create a ship that it's not the Enterprise, but it's that's what you do. And that way we can kind of play all those things. So just for demonstration purposes. So yeah, we do this, like I say, tell everybody Monday and Wednesday. We're looking at doing world building. If anybody wants to cover what I covered in more depth or sees other things about terrain and sighting or anything like that, that's fine. I'll do some more of that. I was thinking about what were we talking about today? There was I'm so forgetful. But the other thing I was going to talk about was time, doing more with time, and why I believe strict time. Well, strict makes it sound like it's some sort of complicated thing, but attentive timekeeping can be helpful as opposed to a hindrance. Uh, Things like that. So, especially combat round phases. That was what it was. I wanted to do some demonstrations for how longer combat phases look when you play them out in a narrative sense as opposed to the shorter combat phases. Yeah, right. There it is. Uh, yeah, so that does because people were talking about the minute round versus the 10-second segment, and I wanted to show that both and I had a couple of other examples on how to show that stuff too. So uh, to visualize it, I have trouble if I can't visualize it, if it doesn't make sense in my head when I think it through. Is I know a lot of people look at the word simulation as a pejorative, but what are you trying to simulate? What are you trying? If I'm rolling the die for an attack, is it a swing of a sword? Is it many swings of a sword? Where are and does that fit into the time scale that you're going for? Yeah, to do that and show people how scaling works. Yeah, how you can scale time depending on what the situation is. So that's what I'll do next outside of the world building. Now take some ginseng so I can remember something. God, am I bad? So anybody else got any questions, comments, criticisms, commentary? I always like to get feedback, like to do Q&As. I'm not very good with a soapbox I'm better with a Q&A really, but spatial acuity. Yeah. Yeah. That's sighting. That's another thing to talk about. Because when you're using binoculars, are you how much farther are you seeing versus how much better are you seeing at a distance? Can you One of the greatest visual representations of that I've seen, and I'll have to dig it up because I don't know where to find it. The internet's changed so much, but you could see looking through an old tank battle site what magnification does for accuracy. Uh, you know, the German battle site versus the American battle site circa World War II, and what the German battle site could do. At the same distance with an American battle site, pretty sure that's a tank out there, and I can lay my target on it. But with the German one, I can see the difference between the turret and the hull, and I can aim for that ring at the same distance that you can just barely make it out as a tank in the American one. And that spatial acuity, that ability to see it at a greater resolution, even though it's the same distance. With a lot of games, it's just a distance thing. They don't consider magnification if you're playing war games or anything like that. So, and how does that work with just a naked eye? That's another thing that we could talk about. Yeah, yeah, and I can put something together for that real easy, and that would be a good one. It's a good idea. See how that looks with. So that's why I use another thing with paracosmic convergence. This is one that tends to be the make or break for whether people are interested. Is I use skills over attributes. Attributes are minimal part of the game comparative to skills, and the reason is, in my estimation, you can have more customization of characters with skills, and they better fit the kind of things we're talking about. Because if you're going to be accurate, it's not just. I mean, your optics help if you can, but there is a way to. It takes skill to compensate for that lack of resolution, and you can still be a pretty damn good gunner even if you've got less than optimal sights. Some guys like Lafayette Poole could snap a panther pretty good because he had a technique. He developed a skill. So I had a friend, and attributes are too vague in my opinion. Dexterity is a great example. I had a friend who was a tremendous shot with a rifle, but he was also a very large man. He had some problems with diabetes, and he wasn't running the 50-yard dash at all, let alone fast. And I'm not trying to be insensitive to, but it's true. Elmer would be the first one to tell you. And so dexterity would, if in a game, if dexterity wouldn't work, because at one issue, dexterity with missile weaponry, he's very good, but he's slower than Molasses in January. And dexterity usually gives you speed bonus and missile bonus. So I like skills because they're more specific. And having a missile bonus in all missile weapons doesn't make sense because, to me, and this may be more detail than most people like, but throwing a javelin is a lot different than firing a bow. It's a completely different technique, and the greatest archer in the world may not be able to chuck that javelin for a damn. So you have a skill in the weapon that you're using, or you develop one as you use it. stuff like that, and paracosmic convergence. So, and I don't do character levels. So I say that because I don't want to get people, oh yeah, I love this game, and then they hear that, and because those are usually the deal breakers. A lot of people go, oh no, I don't want any part of that. But I think that developing skills over developing class or character levels is a better way to go for what I'm doing. So I have that. Like I said, more customization, stuff like that. So it's not everybody's cup of tea after I tell them that, but there's no point in not being upfront about it. So, other than that, anybody got any other questions or anything like that? I always feel like I drift too far off topic, but I don't mind just openly chatting either. So, but I see people coming and going, so I want to make sure that I haven't bored anybody. Anybody got any more they want to talk about or hear about or anything like that? Any other topics? I'd like to play the crowd. See where we're going here. Oh, yeah. Well, anyway, oh yeah, I always see a little bit of that timing. Yeah, yeah. The skill is right. You know, that's what it's about. You can overcome things. So, uh, overcome a deficiency. A great example. One of my favorite scenarios from an old Avalon Hill war game called Flight Leader um, was what they call Towering Inferno, and it was it was about the trials of the F-15 uh, Eagle interceptor, and that it almost got canceled as a project because uh, it went to Miramar. I think it was Miramar. No, it was a red flag. It was at red flag, and and they fought F5s, the aggressor F5s, and they got their tails waxed, and all the congressmen were, oh, this is supposed to be the greatest and the latest and the greatest, and it none of them survived. We don't want to pay for that. It's a bad system. It doesn't work. Hey man, those guys that fly in those aggressors are some of the best pilots in the world, and they knew how to play their strengths against the greater technology's weakness. They had better skill. Your skill has, but when you get into wargaming, you have to temper that, because if I'm firing a 25 millimeter Boys anti-tank rifle at something, I can be skilled till the day is long with the damn thing. It's not going to do jack doodly to a medium or late war tank. It's just going to go plink no matter what, no matter how good my skill is. So sometimes, it's a balance between technology and know-how. You know, but yeah, skill can overcome a lot. Just like I said with the Shermans, as far as accuracy, if you're 3 clicks out and you've got a 75 millimeter M2 short barrel, well, hope you're hitting them in the flank, because you might not get through in the front. But no matter how good a shot it is, because the glacis plate on a Panther is pretty thick. But so you kind of got to play both ends. But in fantasy, the skill kind of comes out, because your sword may be made by a better blacksmith, but at the end of the day, the difference between the two, it either stays together when you hit somebody with it, or it doesn't. There's no performance differentiation, really. So, but that's why I have skills, and I have skills in lethality. Lethality considers the technological ability of the weapon being used. versus its target, and the skill is your ability to use that weapon against that target effectively. Those two factors determine, your plus some random luck and such, determine your effectiveness against your enemy in combat in the game. So it's a little bit different than the roll to hit stuff. It's kind of roll to figure out if you've done anything significant or not. I kind of melded it all into one. So, and then I there was a game designer named James Dunnigan, and he said this phrase, and people need to put it into context because he didn't mean being illegal, but he said plagiarize, plagiarize, plagiarize. In that, if there's something that's already been designed that works as a component inside a game you're designing, don't reinvent the wheel just to be different. Use it. Innovation should be, your energy for innovation should go somewhere else. So when it came to skills, as far as skill checks, like did I pick the lock or whatever, I didn't go for something new. I borrowed from West End Games. So you've got that same D6 type of system where you go easy, moderate, difficult, heroic, and your skill is a modifier. The better you are at a skill, the higher your modifier is. That modifier goes to your skill check. So if you're +3 in lock picking, you roll your 3d6 and you add 3. How hard is that lock to pick? Is it moderate? Okay, did you beat the target number? So, and I like that system too because it gives the DM the ability to quickly modify for the specific situation. Well, it's a little bit harder than easy, but it's not as hard as difficult. So instead of the 5 or the 10, maybe it'll be an 8. They can just kind of randomly pick a number they find appropriate, and it keeps things fresh and changes it up. And that way, gamers can't game the system too much because they never know specifically what the target number is until they've rolled and they're told. That's why I like that. Keeps it simple too, without having to have whole charts about your percentile chance. Like Dungeons and Dragons. What's your percentile chance to do this if you're this level? Now it's just what's the DM say is hard versus what you can roll. A lot easier, a lot simpler and quicker. So, and it works for everything. That's why the game can do whatever, because that can just as be easy a roll to pick a lock as it is to do a radio check in World War II or hack a computer in sci-fi, or rustle a cattle in some Western game or whatever it is. So, and that's what Rob, Rob says this. He goes, Kuntz, he says, really all you need is combat mechanics, preferably simple, and some random determination for skills, for trying to do something. If it's not a guarantee that it won't happen or a guarantee that it will happen, it's randomly determined if it will or won't. That's all you need, and some combat. Everything else the DM should be able to do on his own just by using logic. Now, most people want some guidance, so that's in there, and that's why there's pages about those kinds of things. But that's really all they are, is guidance, just a starting point. So that's what that's what he said OD&D was too. So anyway, well, let's see. We've been rolling for about 3 hours. So I think I've burned through everybody's gas. I don't see anybody responding anymore. I think pretty much everybody's cleared out for the night. So I'm a night owl, so I can go all night, but most people can't. So this was a great live. I'm glad people enjoyed it. I saw a lot of new faces. I hope you all come back. I appreciate spending the time and having conversations with people. I don't get a lot of social time locally, so it's always appreciated. Don't forget, I'll put out that that Discord link. Well, here's all my links again, and we'll get that Discord. Let's see if I can make this one permanent. The thing defaults to 7 days. It doesn't want to let you have a permanent link. But hopefully this one will stay up a little bit longer. So there you go. So you can find me at all the places under all my links. And you can definitely find me at Discord because I'm usually logged on. So it's I'm working on it, just like the streaming. I haven't gotten the knack of every little thing. So when you log onto the Discord, it may be a little bit different than most because I haven't set it up. I set it up kind of weird, but bear with it. You should be able to see the general page or the general channel and ask any questions, introduce yourself, talk about whatever. Feel free. So, all righty. Pretty good stuff. Glad I did it. I was thinking about canceling, but I soldiered on without my co-host. So we'll see you on Wednesday, same bat time, same bat channel, 9:30 Central Standard Time. I think that's what they call it. I don't think we're going to have to do that very much longer because they're going to change the savings time. But for now, 9:30 Central Time. Thanks again. Have a good night. Oh, and the outro is a little bit of an attention getter, so watch out because here it comes. It's pretty cool, though. Check it out.